We are now in a world that is run, and in a country that is run by many multinational corporations. The first multinational corporation was called the Dutch West India Trade Company. It was created during what those people from Holland, the Netherlands, called their golden age, where they were at the height and peak of their role as colonizers and settlers. When they arrived at the island, representatives of the first multinational corporation, when they arrived at the island of Manhattan, they were welcomed by the indigenous of the land, the Lene Lenape, who welcomed them, who introduced them to the three sisters, the crops that were grown, who fed them, who sheltered them. But these Dutch settlers on the island of Manhattan they had come from a system where they believed that communities or people who did not have a practice of private property were savage. And these Dutch settlers on the island of Manhattan decided that they would set a price and offer the modern day equivalent of about $25 to the Lene Lenape, the indigenous of the island of Manhattan. The Lene Lenape received this offering as it was a reciprocal gift for all the many offerings that they had given the Lene Lenape, that they had given the Dutch settlers. They received this offering, and the Dutch settlers did not understand how, after they had given them this dead currency, why the indigenous, why the Lene Lenape did not leave the island, why they continued to live there, why they continued to fish there, why they continued to hunt there, why they continued to raise their families there. And so the Dutch settlers on the island of Manhattan decided to build a wall around their compound in the southernmost part of the island of Manhattan, a 12-foot wall. It was a wall that was built to keep the indigenous out. It was a wall that was built to keep the Lene Lenape out. They built towers on the wall and began to shoot at the Lene Lenape, to eventually push them off of the island of Manhattan. Within the confines of this wall, in the northernmost sector, the northeastern sector, the first thing that they created was a marketplace, an exchange under the buttonwood trees. These buttonwood trees still stand. In fact, the exchange, the marketplace still stands. The Dutch were eventually defeated by the English. New Amsterdam became New York. And what was the Amsterdam Exchange became the New York Exchange, became the New York Stock Exchange. In the same exact place that the Dutch settlers built it. At this exchange, you could buy the goods that settlers and colonizers depended on: weapons, tools. You could rent or buy slaves, enslaved Africans. It's important to recognize that everyone had the capacity to to actually own slaves, you know. They would rent them if they were in the process of building something over a weekend or a week. I mean, here in the States, I've seen many people drive into parking lots and find migrants standing outside of depots and hire them to work in their gardens or to help them build. Well, this is what they did at this exchange. As I said, the Dutch were defeated by the English. New Amsterdam became New York. The New York Exchange became the New York Stock Exchange. The wall, however, no longer stands. The wall that they built to keep the indigenous out, the wall that they built to keep the Lene Lenape out, it no longer stands. But there is a marcation that tells you where the northernmost part of this wall was. It is called Wall Street. That is the history of the name and of the location. It was a wall that was built to keep the indigenous out. A wall that was built to keep the Lene Lenape out. I would like to repeat that Assata Shakur said a wall is just a wall. And nothing more at all. It can be broken down. If it is not clear, we are talking about the system and practice of racial capitalism. To some, it may come as a surprise to hear the word racial in front of it. However, many scholars argue that all capitalism and the history of capitalism itself is racial capitalism. Capitalism, a system, began in England. The first people that they were known to locally colonize and profit from were the Irish. Even here in the United States, the Irish initially had what we would call a probationary white status, meaning that when they arrived here, they were not considered white. Nor were they considered that in England when capitalism was developed. Black death and indigenous erasure. On the flip side of that would be Black liberation and indigenous sovereignty. Which is to say land back. Which is to say that the wall that was built on the island of Manhattan, just like the apartheid wall that goes across occupied Palestine, that in fact these systems, have it all in common. They have the same thing in common. And that system is a system not only of erasure, but a system that also would require that you not think about certain things. The idea of, I can't start my day without coffee. Where does the coffee come from? I like my coffee with sugar. Where does the sugar come from? If we were to talk about Congo, we would be talking about Firestone and the rubber on the tires of your car. From that moment to the moment of coltan and cobalt and lithium and diamonds and gold and all of the systems that connect, the foundation of that market, the foundation of that wall that must be broken down because it's simply a wall. It's interesting to think of where it begins. Hack into dietary sustenance, tradition versus health. Hack into comfort compliance, hack into the rebellious gene. Hack into doctrine, capitalism in relation to free labor and slavery. Hack into the history of the bank as being the odds, a mere act of joining the winning team. Hack into desperation and loneliness, hack into the history of community and the marketplace. Hack into land rights and ownership, hack into business law, proprietorship, hack into ambition and greed. Hack into forms of government, systems of control, the relation to suffering and sufferance, hack into faith and morality, the treatment of one faith towards another. Hack into masculinity, femininity, sexuality, what is taught, what is felt, what is learned, what is shared. Hack into God, stories of creation, serpents and eggs. Hack into nature, biodynamics, biodiversity, cycles and seasons. Hack into time, calendars, Descartes, its relationship to doubt. Is it wired to fear, the notion of control, the space-time continuum, the force of gravity? Whether the opposite of gravity is freedom. Hacking to freedom, power, responsibility, justice, the Bill of Rights, hacking to coincidence. The summer of '68, the 27 Club, the number of people with Facebook profiles, people who choose to share, people who share too much, people who seem lonely, people who want to connect, people who want to uplift. Hacking to self-help, self-sufficiency, and self-indulgence. Hacking to crazy, hacking to lunatic, hacking to star, hacking to infamous, notorious. The effects of the construct of poverty on the psyche, the effects of the construct of race, the victims that survive. There is a panel marked survival. 3 simple copper wires coiled around an orb, hacking to orbit, equatorial landmines, useful and precious metals, coated as cotton. Hacking to hazardous nuclear conflict and fish farms, cow parks and pig shit, hacking to horse industrial digital, hacking to code, use your instrument as metaphor, harness your craft, hacking to the mainframe, dismantle definitions, offer and duty, hacking to destiny, hacking to dreams, subtext and subconscious, hacking to heart, cardio, Congo, blood rich and oil, hacking to suffering and despair, hacking the unfair advantage of those lucky enough to be born into one family or another, to one condition or another, hacking to the circumstantial evidence that proves the obvious and makes the oblivious, hacking to birthright, bloodlines, royal and tainted, hacking to superstition, old wives' tales, the rituals of the shaman, hacking to DNA, chemistry, the pharmaceutical industry, the rape of the forest, hacking to the court of the serpents, the modern day of the rape of the forest, the time it takes the modern man to determine whether the woman were foolish or not. Hacking to the database, the panel marked survival, hacking to celebrity, hacking to the cultural development of taste, hacking to violence, fear, and ignorance. How are they linked? There are links to be made. Dots to be connected. Rivers and oceans that were crossed. Land that was pillaged. under the guise of pushing humanity forward, they fixate on the question and idea of technology.